Oh, yeah,
There
there
it
we
is.
go.
Okay.
I got it.
So I am here with Wendy Williams, a nurse from Massachusetts, the next state over from me. We're only an hour and a half away. And dear, I almost said old friend, old as in, my goodness, we met many years ago, right, Keith? Dr. Blevins. And you're in LaConner now. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. I've been here for maybe um nearly 30 years. Yeah,
LaConner, Washington. I
right.
think I met you before I was in the professional training at one of the conferences,
Yeah.
but the training in LaConner, Washington just really stands out for me because, and I don't know if I ever got to share this with you, Keith, but I had, I was talking to you at a very, very vulnerable time in my life. I had just gotten divorced. I was getting to be too old to have children. And I, at the time, thought that I am on this planet to be a wife and a mother. And that wasn't happening. And whatever you said to me
Mm.
was so, it was so appropriate. And I didn't see it right away. But by the time I got out of your office onto the ground floor, it's like, you know, it was like heaven opened up to me because I realized that's, just what I identified with. It doesn't mean that that's even in the cards for me. And that's just what I thought was supposed to be my path in life. And it just really changed my life
Oh,
dramatically. So I get to share that with you now, even if I had it in the past.
yeah.
It's always going to be a great story in my life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. It kind of underlines the whole point of the principles, doesn't it? That your own personal thinking is not it really doesn't have anything to do with anything, but you sometimes think it does, and you believe it does, but uh, it doesn't. It just understanding that fact, and it often is very liberating for, well, if heard, if you understand it, it is liberating and healing completely.
So liberating.
Yeah.
Wendy has her stories, and Wendy sent me videotapes that you created. You said that was done a while back, but because she's a nurse and these videotapes you created was at a training for nurses.
Yes.
And so that's how we got in touch again. And we said, let's, the three of us get on a call and
Yeah.
find out what we can. We're going to pick Keith's brain.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you said to Lori, from what I understand, is that those videos that are out in the public domain were older. And for some reason, I thought they were in the last couple of years, but from what you shared with Lori, that actually, no, they're a few years old. And you have since had a few more light bulbs. Is that accurate or?
Oh, very, very much so. Yeah.
Wow.
Lots of light bulbs. Yeah. Yeah, but they stand their own. They stand on their own. And I got the chance in that video to talk to a room full of nurses and physicians and what have you, healthcare professionals in Texas. And it was really quite a moment, because we really kind of, as a group, I think, or I would say many people in the audience got struck by the fact that there were no that the former limitations, just like Lori's story she just told here, the former limitations that they people in the room had thought uh, were vanished by by a deeper understanding of the principles and their relationship to the nature of life. And so that was quite a moving moment. There was one, just let me share just one story. There was one moment in there, because we were filming in the audience, we had decided not to film members of the audience. So when it came time for a break, at some point I asked for people to submit questions, and there was one nurse in the audience, anonymous. I did not know who it was, still don't, but who said, "I've just been diagnosed with deterioration of my myelin sheath, which is the protective uh, covering that our nervous system has, and that is a dire diagnosis, because that means um, severe difficulties with your nervous system and their functioning. Your brain and spinal cord are covered by your myelin sheath, and so in my presentation, I had made the point that the principles are the only discriminator that anyone need realize was the bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world being one. And so we put that on, we had a little line and we put it on both sides of the line, and it really sobered the room, because all of these were medical professionals, and Lord knows they deal with all sorts of conditions every day, and all of us healthcare professionals deal with all sorts of thoughts and dilemmas and issues every day, just like Lori just mentioned. But when they realized that they were conditions in their own personal thinking, and that was, and then in contrast to the truth of the principles, mind, consciousness, and thought being the only gap between people and divine wisdom, it disappeared for her in this audience, or many of the people in the audience. And it was quite a moment. It was quite a moment for me too, just to put that up there, because as a presenter, you never know what kind of questions you're going to get. And that was kind of a stopper, for me. I thought, diagnosis with deterioration of my myelin sheath on one side of the line, and diagnosis with my myelin sheath on the other side of the line. What separates them? And when we viewed both of those conditions in light of the principles, the feeling of a panic or the feeling was brought into the principles, and it was just a really deep moment for the group. So that happened in that presentation, as you both know, but it was quite a moving moment, and what a great point to be made, for all of us, regardless of our circumstances and situations, that the principles are the only missing link. And so in our beliefs, we do often think, well, if I had health, or if I didn't have deterioration of my myelin sheath, or if I didn't have war going on in my neighborhood, or whatever, whatever it is, to find this cosmic truth of this union between the spiritual and the principles, that the principles are the only distance, and they are no distance without personal thought. They are no distance between the spiritual and the physical.
Mm. I'd love to share something that happened to me just this weekend along those lines. I have a son that's up against a very difficult situation that could take him out of circulation for a few years. I won't say any more than that. And that's like it's in the air now. There's all these talks and negotiations going on right now. Friday, today, this is a Sunday as we're speaking. 2 days ago, my husband found out something in his professional life that was kind of shocking, and like that could take my husband and I this way instead of this way. And it's like, oh, and so when's that? That's like, wow. And then I have an 81-year-old sister in the hospital who is managing some difficult days, and I'm a nurse, and so I'm the one that gets the calls, and I'm trying to talk to the doctor, So as of Friday, my sister got admitted to the hospital on Friday. My husband found out this professional weirdness on Friday, and we got some big news about my son and his. So all those three things came into my life in front of me. And what I've come to understand as I've been in this conversation about the principles is these were three circumstances that have occurred. And what I marveled at as I was managing, talking to my sister's doctor, as I was listening to my husband's concerns about this professional thing and so forth, is I marveled, and I'm marveling even in an hour ago, I was telling friends, I have been concerned all weekend, but I haven't been worried once. And that distinction for me between concern and worry is such a qualitative, beautiful feeling. Despite, would I like to erase all those three circumstances? You betcha. I really would. But life is life. And the 10 years ago, this gal would have been worried and trying to whack a mole, trying to find all these things and trying to manage my anxiety, manage, don't do this, do that, to other people, and just don't call me again, or but I don't do that anymore. And it just so came up so clearly in this past 36 hours. And I'm really enjoying listening to myself saying, you are concerned, but you're not worried. Isn't this nice? Yes, it is. I'm having this little conversation within, and it just is one more ripple in this understanding of the principles that I am feeling and knowing that needs to be out there more. So I'm really glad to be on the call with you. Yeah.
Well, me too. Me too.
Yeah,
That,
best
that's a
kept
wonderful.
secret. It's just been the best kept secret. Little by little, it's people are seeing more and more and relaxing more and more as a result.
Hmm. Yeah, you can't help but be struck by the truth, and it does elevate your consciousness about what's going on, because when you put feelings onto objects, like in your mind about your husband's profession or your son's dilemma, when you that creates, like you're saying, worry, even concern. But if you put if you see like Sidney Banks, this is Sidney Banks quote. He said, that mental sickness is created when you put feelings onto objects. But if you can see the objects without the feelings, you're healthy. And that says the same point we're all making here. That is such an amazing truth that is certainly unknown to most of the world. And has been unknown to the likes of us, even the three of us heretofore. So when you see how this works, like I was talking to a fellow professional who's a Jewish man, who was helping me conduct a webinar on Thursday, and so we were visiting before we went live on air with these dozens of participants. And so I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, I'm normal." He said, I can't believe it." He said, I have a lot of people that I consult with who are troubled, but I'm not. I'm surprised. I'm surprising myself that I'm normal. I feel normal. And I don't feel sick, mentally sick. And that seems like it seems like a sort of no-brainer, but it's really not a no-brainer. It really does involve an elevation of understanding about where your feelings are coming from, and where your experience is coming from, and how for everyone, the truth of that for everyone on the planet. Whoa, if we could only have it dawn on everyone, it would be a different world altogether.
Isn't that the truth? That is so absolutely true. So the question is, how is this going to be shared and go out? And how do you see that, Keith? I mean, it has been more than ever. The ripple effect had, as people experience less stress and more understanding about how we really work, they affect other people. And, it's just people sharing what they have come to see. And I'll speak for myself, it just can't happen fast enough. With all that we see in the world going on today, I mean, I just wish there was a button to push and everybody would become more enlightened. And what's behind that enlightenment is love. That's what we have all come to see. That, to me, that's our spiritual essence. To what I've come to see, and everything else, we're just projecting our own ideas. It's our own interpretation of what's going on out there through the gift of thought that we often use against ourselves and against other people.
It's first and foremost against ourselves, always. But you mentioned to me in our conversation before this event, or before getting together, about this book that Sidney Banks was writing. It was the last book he was writing, and when he received his terminal diagnosis in December 2008, and he passed away in May of 2009. And so he called me and got Valda and I on the phone and said, I want to give you this book. And so he did. And it hasn't been published, but he wrote so many, like he had written, I think, nearly 90 pages or some such, which was a lot of pages. It is a lot of pages. So there's another chunk of his original writings, and there are other things as yet unpublished that he had written prior to that. But why I bring that up is that he said in there that understanding or using these principles properly, you must land in love and understanding. And there's no way out of that, that's a kind of foregone conclusion. You see and the principles only work one way, and they are true for everybody on the planet, birth to death. And so you can't, and they're not by your hand or design. They're you don't make them, but they exist. And so using what we're left with, the free will to use them properly, and that elevates our consciousness, and that changes our mental problems without effort, because it's not those problems were based on a false separation between the spiritual and the physical. And the principles reveal that. So there are three spiritual truths, or three spiritual principles that are also psychological principles. And by the way, psychology has never had principles since its growth and inception over 100 years ago now. So it brings together these kind of rivers of truth, that are spiritual, psychological, physical, but all resulting in one truth about the nature of our mental life. And so it's it must bring love and understanding to any soul, to any person, because it's truth, and it's not a little truth, like, well, my truth is better than your truth, or any such thing. It's truth with a big T, you might say, or a truth beyond time, space, and matter. And so, as such, it's kind of a healer, and I think people that have been gaining more ground on that have been experiencing that more and more, all of us. And the more we gain, the further that gets realized. And we don't have to. The other thing that I'd say too, I don't think we have to wait. Fortunately, waiting is not part of the formula. The formula is complete. mind plus consciousness plus thought equals reality. And that's our privilege to know, and get out of the, because I often hear people say, well, how long it's going to be, or I sure wish people in Gaza knew this, or whatever. But it's not a time-based thing, is it? It's before time, or beyond. Sidney's autobiography, appropriately titled Beyond Time, Space, and Matter, because he saw the truth of that. When you read his autobiography, as I have, something's missing. I kept thinking about something's missing here, like he left out something, but he didn't leave it out. He didn't even consider it. It wasn't anything. There wasn't any gap. And if I may, I'll read just a little passage of what this is, his writings about the day that he realized these three principles. And this was the day after he realized the truth of the truth of the union between the spirit. And so he had this experience, and then the next day, his mother-in-law and wife wouldn't even talk to him. They were frightened, and so I'm going to start there. The following day, both Barb and her mom would barely look at me or talk to me. When they did speak, it was to challenge me on almost everything I said. At first, it truly puzzled me that Barb and her mom were unable to comprehend what I was saying. As far as I was concerned, I was talking plain, simple English. Yet my words were greeted as if they were in a foreign language. Now I realize that I had been naive. Now I realize that I had been naive, thinking that all I had to do was tell Barb and Mom what I was experiencing, and they would just naturally understand what I was saying. By that time, regardless of my statement of the evening before, even I didn't realize the true depth and meaning of my experience, and that it would change the rest of my life. That would change the rest of my life into an unexplainable mystical adventure. I remember the day following my experience, Grandma asked me in a challenging voice, what makes you think you have anything to offer the field of psychology? You must be aware you are talking utter nonsense. You know absolutely nothing about the subject. I didn't blame her for posing the question or for her unkind comment, because she was absolutely correct. I knew nothing whatsoever about psychology. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even spell the word. I had no idea what to say in reply to Grandma's question, and I hesitated for a few seconds. This is really interesting to me. Then, for the very first time, and without any previous knowledge of their existence, I uttered the secret formula of the three principles, saying, quote, because there are three principles, divine mind, divine consciousness, and divine thought, they are the Trinity underlying all of humanity's psychological experiences here on Earth. And right now, I doubt that the field has even a clue of their existence. Turning to Barb, I said, don't you see, Pat? From the cradle to the grave, by using these three principles, every human being in the world weaves their own entirely individual experience here on Earth. What do you mean? She asked. It's like this, Pat. Before time, space, and matter, there lies a mystical world of formless energy that very few people since the beginning of time have ever known. By using these principles I am talking about, we transform this formless energy into the physical world we call creation. These three principles are the ultimate mystery on earth and are the missing link to the physical world and the spiritual world being one. The three principles are the greatest secret on earth and hold all the answers that psychology, psychiatry, and all humanity have been searching for since the beginning of time. Barb looked totally confused. Oh, wait, let me stop there. So I mentioned that when I read this, there was something missing, but I know what it was. After a while, I realized there was a oneness implied in his wording, which was also in his comprehension, which helped him to say that there was no middleman. There was no self. There was no understanding more. There was no, if you mind your P's and Q's and do this or do that, no doing. There was no separation. There was the illusion of separation had disappeared for him. And he spoke about that. If you listen carefully to his further recordings and such, he didn't include separation. It wasn't part of his world. It had disappeared. And that's just a remarkable truth that I'm struck by over and over and over again. You two both have been struck by as well, that there's nothing else in the way of oneness. There's nothing in the way of oneness. And the principles prove it. But now, if you look at a lot of philosophy people, other people, they couch it in other ways that is not about the principles being the only, our use of the principles being the only discriminated, the only thing that creates an illusion of separation. And that is Sydney Banks's incredible contribution to the future of humanity, and we're all lucky to be acknowledging it and sharing it, and learning, continuing to learn more about it. Like it's not a static truth. There's further revelations and further revelations and further, and it's endless. There's endless revelations in store. So when people sometimes I can hear people sounding a little cocky or a little like they know, well, I know the principles, da 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 da. They're not really touched by the evolutionary import for them, of continuous revelation. So never think that you've got it.
Yeah, I've been intrigued since. Thank you for reading that from Sid's writings. And I was intrigued earlier when you said something about a misuse of the principles. And so I think in analogies, or maybe it's metaphors. I can never remember which one. But when how and you used it in your talks to the nurses about germ theory. So now we know that germ theory is a principle of health and wellness, let's say, right? We know that now. In the earlier generations days, there was some skepticism. I think there's some word that says something gets adopted after 50 years or 60 years. Sometimes there's a cycle of adoption for some new discoveries kind of thing. So how does one misuse germ theory? Because that will help me understand how people might misuse the principles, the psychological, spiritual principles of how we work. Do you know what I mean? Is that a clear question for you?
Sure. Well, just look at the history. So before, I think it was around 1860, not specific date. Before then, which wasn't that long ago, my great-grandparents were in the Civil War. So they were living during that Civil War time. So
Right.
not very long ago, medicine had no clue that there were germs because you couldn't see them. There were no optics to see germs. And then medical people began to piece together. Semmelweis was one of the first, and he because he had at that point there was death would result often from women giving birth in the hospitals, and he just happened to inquire right on the other side of the wall was the birth givers or birth um, women who gave birth without medical help, and he happened to ask what was the incidence of childbed fever, which was a horrific impending death. Once they diagnosed a woman had childbed fever, they put her on the ward of other women who were dying because they knew there was nothing they could do because they really didn't know what it was. And they attributed it to various and sundry other things. It was loud noises. It was genetics. It was this. It was that. It was none of those things. Absolutely none of them. It was germs introduced into the body of women giving birth by the surgeons on their scalpels.
Mm-hmm.
When the surgeons heard about, so Semmelweis got the idea, well, let's try and, because on the ward without surgeons, the death rate was 1% of childbed fever. On the ward with surgeons, it was 10%. And it was 10% worldwide. So he thought, well, let's study what they're doing over there. So he looked and he looked for loud noises. Maybe loud noises are doing something. Maybe, so he put a door in to enter into the where the ward was that the mothers were dying, so that the priests could come in and that were ringing a loud bell and to deliver last rites would not be detected by women who had not yet developed any symptomatology. It did nothing, of course, because they didn't know what the true cause was. And psychology's been in that state too. We didn't know what the true variable was, the sole variable, the only variable that of these principles, and our use of our free will in use of them. That's the key. And if people get that, then they begin to evolve in their consciousness. If they now sometimes they are already evolved in their consciousness, and they might not exhibit such profound lack of wisdom, but it's always according to those principles. Those principles are the greatest mystery on earth. And so what do we do, to speak to your question, there's a rigorous science and a specificity and a scientificity about these principles. They are science with a big S that psychology's been looking for, because their thought was, if we could find principles of psychology, it would create a new era, an era that would mean the end, the completion and culmination of the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution has been going on since Copernicus discovered that the Earth was not the center of the solar system. So that's happened for centuries and centuries and centuries. But this completion of the human factor and the knowledge of our use of these principles has been hotly debated, but never brought any clarity to, not until Sydney Banks. Sydney Banks brought, according to this account that I just read, his own account, that it occurred to him what the point was, and so it's not unlike Semmelweis realizing that there was some material on a scalpel that killed a fellow surgeon of his, who did not happen to be a woman. It was a man, that he suffered in the operating room by a clumsy medical student. So when Semmelweis realized there was some material, he didn't know what to call it. There was some material on that scalpel. It was a specificity and a scientificity about germs. And right there, medicine changed. Now, it took decades. In 1900, the president of the United States was wounded by an assassination attempt. So this was 1860. So 40 years after that realization, the physicians attending the wounded president stuck their fingers into the hole in his abdomen, trying to dislodge the bullet, and they got the bullet out. But what they introduced to the wound killed the president. So did they arrest the physicians for murdering the president? No, because they just didn't realize the contamination factor. The contamination factor of personal thinking is alive and well today all over the world. In every place we go, it is a contamination of the principles. The principles are not contaminatable. They are without human contamination. They are spiritual principles. And so we have to, as healthcare professionals, get this understanding of the principles forward out there. That's what we're doing here. But we've got to do it on a scale that is way, way, way beyond what we've done thus far, because we're a drop in the bucket of the crazy making of using there's other intervening variables. Well, those people are Jews, or those people are Muslims, or whatever reason that are not true. They're only beliefs. And Sydney
So
Banks,
is that corollary sort of like when the doctor said, I know, we'll make the room quiet because loud noises might be killing the women. So what we're saying is, oh, well, of course, Jews and Muslims don't get along, so that must be the reason why. So it's a similar sort of poking around, looking for the answer, but it's really right there. It's been right there all along,
Right,
but
exactly.
we're not seeing it, and we're
Exactly.
ascribing different reasons and looking and hoping and trying to find, but it's right here. It's
Right,
this germ on this scalpel. It's this, yeah. Mm,
exactly.
mm,
Now,
mm.
now Sid, in his, so one other thought here. Sid in the Enlightened Gardener, towards the end of it, he he says all this, as he would often, as he said, he just knew. I don't know how he knew, but he knew. He somehow knew these matters, and he said that these principles would be revolutionary, not just for psychology, but for all the sciences, for all religions, for all philosophies, for all humankind of any sort, all fields, because it's true, and that pertains to the blowing out, blowing out our minds, of the contaminated thinking of beliefs, concepts. So when you listen to the news, as sometimes I do, it's full of beliefs. It's full of controversy. It's full of, well, what if the shooter knew? Why did he sort out black people, and let them go, and then he kept the white people and shot all them? It just goes on and on and on. Because they have no comprehension of a true discriminator. And that true discriminator, just like germs did for medicine, it just eventually stopped people treating the wounded as if germs were non-existent. And it radically changed healthcare. And so that's the point I was making in that conference, because to me it is it's one way to try and see the practicality and the import and the value of these three principles. They're just as important as germs were to Semmelweis, but they're even more important to all of the sciences, because all the sciences, as well as all fields, they're trying to grapple with where do we belong in this uh, great drama of life, and how do we enjoin that oneness, and the truth of it, and I'm often reminded of Chief Joseph said, of the Nez Perce, who was an American native wise man here, said that man did not create the web of life. We did not create these principles, but we are a part of it, which we are. And then he said, but whatever we do to this web, we do to ourselves. And that, of course, is true. That's what Sid pointed up with the um, because every person has it within themselves to realize this truth, and to treat life with more love and kindness and generosity of spirit for their own sake, because whatever they do, whatever they think, whatever sin they think of, it's just a thought. But if they act on it, they they do so in ignorance and they wound life and it's a self-inflicted wound. And so we can't be separated. There is the illusion of separation, which the principles reveal for all of us, the illusion of separation, and it instills in us a deeper love and kindness and a deeper understanding. And that's all we need to change the world.
What to this day is still amazing to me, and like you say, Keith, how more and more gets revealed to us. I love that word. I never thought to use that word, where there are more revelations when we look in the direction of the spiritual, look in the direction of mind, thought, and consciousness.
And the oneness of the spiritual and the physical, that's what was missing for me. When I read that account, I thought, well, wait a minute, what else is there? But he knew there was no separation between the physical and the spiritual. So it's that illusion of separation. It's the illusion of separation is the only fallacy to be revealed as illusionary. There is no separation. There can't be. It's impossible.
And how divinely, the divine, what's the word that Sid used? I can't think of it right now, but the design, how humans have been designed all along. And, we're just now beginning to recognize, it's like we're born with an internal GPS system. We can be guided by it just by realizing that our feelings, we're feeling what we're thinking. And if it feels bad, that's the signal letting us know, ooh, we gotta look in a different direction, take a turn. We're off course, we're getting ourselves in hot water, in trouble.
I think if we can see it, it's in our own interest of our own, that everyone has this, and it's in our own best interest. That as we've often seen with people in jail or murderers or people that you might think would not have a shred of concern for others, somehow these principles have spoken to them, and they've realized, oh my goodness, I can't do that anymore, because I am part of the web of life, and I can't, whatever I do to the web, I do to myself. That self-interest that we all naturally have is the saving grace of truth, and it'll give us pause before we pull the trigger or before we do whatever. It changes behavior. So behavior is a result, and feelings are a result of our use of these principles. Feelings are not part of the three principles. They're mind, thought, and consciousness, not, and I mentioned this the other day, the first book that was out about the principles included feelings as the fourth principle. And
moods, I thought, wasn't it moods and sanity, insanity, and common sense? You mean that book?
yeah, and so
a great example of how easily Sid's understanding got misunderstood.
and he was promoting the book and telling people, buy it. And then someone said to him, boy, that fourth principle, that's great. And he said, excuse me? And he said, what do you mean fourth principle? And he said, well, mind, thought, consciousness, and feelings. And he hit the ceiling. He was absolutely outraged. He immediately called up the authors, who I know both of them, and I talked them through this publishing crisis. And he said, you must pull that book from the shelves. That book is a total distortion of everything that I've ever stood for. And I will not rest until you do something about this. And they said, well, Sid, we can't. We've already sold the book to the publisher, and which was true, because then once the publisher has it, they can do with it what they want. And he said, I don't care. I don't care that you've sold it. Buy it back. Do something, because if you don't, I will make your life a living hell. And those words coming from Sid carried some weight, and so they had to buy the book back at great expense to them, and rewrite it. And then that happened again. Many years later, that happened again to another author that I know. And he insisted that they buy the book back. And they ended up buying the book back. So it wasn't, so there's nothing mamby-pamby about these principles, or nothing, there's nothing, there's three principles, and there are only three, and they're immortal. They're not even proposed by Sydney Banks, so they have nothing to do with Sid, or anyone else. They are truth, and they're the only truth that will make a difference. All other attempts to without armed by the truth of those principles, negotiators and people are not coming from a solid ground. And for our future, for the future of our science. So this is a scientific truth, and it can't be usurped or changed, or it'll be true 1,000 years from now. It'll be true, and won't be added to, or it's not capable of being lost. Well, it's capable of being lost and distorted, but in and of itself, it can't be done. And we have to be clear about that going forward.
I just want to be clear for myself, and maybe help other people. Are you saying the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought are not only the bedrock foundational principles of how human experience works, or the psychology of humanity works, but they're also the foundation of anything that we can discover about the world, about humanity and physical, like physics and aeronautics and
Yes.
heartbeat? Okay. Well, this is okay. Thank you. Wow. Okay, got it.
Yes. And I'm trying to find where this is. And if I may take a second to locate it exactly. This is in The Enlightened Gardener Revisited, because Janet is who, Sid put his characters in a story, and these people are asking Sid, well, wait a minute, I thought this, they just basically say, in response to your question, they say, well, wait a minute, I thought this was just pertaining to psychology. And then the character says, well, I'm just beginning to realize you don't mean just psychology, you mean all the sciences and all and more. And he said, Andy says, who is Sid in disguise, says, absolutely, it means all sciences, all religions, all any part of any human endeavor ever to sort out where do we belong here? What is the story? What is our connection? All of it, all philosophies, all of it are all based on our use of these principles. And it was a striking moment for these other professionals to go, oh, yeah. They see it happening for Wendy too. So yeah, it's not it's the greatest mystery on the face of the earth. These principles are the greatest mystery, not just psychological functioning, but for the human welfare. And as he said, before time, space, and matter. So these are before time, space, and matter. They're not of this world of form. They're formless, and they're without exception or without any opposite. There lies a mystical world of formless energy. Formless energy that very few people since the beginning of time have ever known. Very few people. And he made this point in our book, by the way. He said, very few people since the beginning of time have ever truly realized this field of formless energy. And those people are often called the enlightened ones. And this happened to him without a doubt. And he was a voice about that, a modern voice about this truth that has endured through the ages, but it's been hidden in concepts and beliefs and ideas and etc. So he was a clear voice for that, for what this really was. And we can, anyone can listen to him, read his works. You will find it's embedded in everything he said. He didn't have a middleman. And you'll always find a middleman without an enlightened person. I found you'll find some other intervening variable, some other thing, some other doing, some other illusionary thought, some practice, some technique, something that will help you bring yourself to a better place. And he had none of that. And so listen carefully, read Sydney Banks and study him as I have. But you can't you can't underestimate the power of having a voice of that profundity. And I don't know why he had it, but he did, and he was given it. And I'm privileged to talk about it, but because he saw and understood the physical and the spiritual world are one. And he said to me once, he said, I was telling him about, I was going to be talking to a famous rabbi. And he said to me, tell the rabbi that I found what Abraham found. And that was boy, that gave me pause, because I thought that's a that's a that's a heck of of a claim. And I had some suspicion of what it might mean to him, and it didn't mean anything to the rabbi. The rabbi was, oh yeah, it was just, he just sort of flipped it off, or just, yeah, you know, like he wasn't even that impressed. I was totally impressed with it, but what Abraham found, you know, founded the three main religions of the world. But what it means to us, what it, you know, what it, the value we find on the principles, that's our blessing. Well, maybe we should, maybe this is a good place to stop. Why not?
Well, let's see. I mean, there's a million other questions that I could pop out at you. Right now, I'm gonna get a battery though, so hang on just 1 minute. I have to replace the battery for my hearing.
The production is paused for a battery replacement.
A battery replacement. I'll tell you one thing that I'm curious about, and I think you've alluded to it a little bit, but what is your since you put those videos out to the nurses in Texas a few years ago, what has become more apparent or newly apparent or an interesting light bulb since then? Because I think you kind of gave Lori the impression that those videos may be a little bit dated compared to where you might be at now. So I'm just curious if there's any sort of one or two particularities that come to mind.
Scientificity,
Ah,
that that these principles have been sought through the ages, and that they're now, they form a completion and culmination of the scientific revolution. I mentioned that earlier, but
yeah, okay, got
that's
it.
no small thing. That is a huge thing for our earth and the conduct of our affairs. And so, and the scientificity of that, the science of that, the truth of that, cannot be usurped. It's an immortal truth. It's not a belief truth. All this is a truth. There's a place where everybody's truth is the same. That's that truth. And it creates an honor in my mind to all human beings, of their carriers of these wisdoms, that these principles are fundamentally at the bottom of their own experiences of life, and they cannot be extracted or separated out. And they can't be lost. They can be covered up, but they can't be lost.
Mhm.
And that commands respect, in my mind, for every thinker.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so
When
that
you say that they can't be lost, they can be covered up, but they can't be lost. What I'm also hearing is they are going to bring another concept into the picture, 24/7, 365, east, west, north, south. Like it's immutable. It is what it is. And we have called it the sun, and we've called it the east, and we've called it the west. So the sun rises in the east, no matter what part of the earth you're sitting on, Would that be correct? Am I correct in that? So that all humanity thinks that, banks on it, depends on that, and all humanity says everybody's got a heartbeat. Every human being that's able to survive the womb actually has a heart that beats. And so we take it for granted. Like that's how humans get up and walk, is that they have a heart that works. And we have a sun that rises. So it's as basic as that, like that we all can agree that there's the sun rises and sets and we have hearts. Am I making myself clear? I don't know.
Well, sure, but be yeah, the realization of such, there's people, the Flat Earth Society people or whoever they are. I don't even know if they're, well, actually, I've met people who didn't agree with the fact that the sun is the center of the solar system. I've actually talked to people who disagreed with that.
Mhm.
But that said, the truth can't be messed with, you might say, or
Mhm.
and that's what you're saying, I think, and that's true. But let's give some reverence to that, such that when we talk about it, we kind of give a little pause of the potential of that truth being within the soul and the consciousness and the minds and the thought, the power of the thought to see the illusion of separation. Everyone has that power.
Mhm.
And so it's right within us always, by birth, by nature, by existence itself. They're inborn, they're innate. When Sydney Banks opened the Institute for Innate Health at West Virginia University, which he later closed down and left because he got no respect for it, really. He was not about to have that be just another thing. It wasn't just a thing, it was the truth. And he was very dedicated. It wasn't dedicated, he was just well, one time we had a group of professionals we were working with, and we had a campfire on the beach one night, and one of the participants there said to Valda, my wife, well, what you've been around, Sid, for all these many years and all these different circumstances and situations, and what one word would you use to characterize all of it as far as you're concerned? And she said, after a few moments, she paused and she said, controversial. He was controversial because he took he took no timidity about emphasizing what was true and what was not. He could not help himself, and he was fierce, absolutely fierce. I never met a more fierce person about what he had to say and share than Sydney Banks, way beyond anything I've ever imagined.
I've heard people say that when they talk about being in the rooms learning from him, they say, I was convinced that he knew something, and that's what spoke to them, was the fire in his eyes, the conviction in his voice, his manner, his that they knew they were in the presence of somebody who knew something very, very deeply important. And that came across. I mean, I've heard several people, I wouldn't be able to tell you now exactly who they are, but in the different videos I've watched over the years, people have been like, that's what really spoke to them was like, this man knew something.
Yeah.
He wasn't making it up. He wasn't doing any sort of PR stunt. He was just, that brings to mind a question I have, Keith. There have been other humans who have had an enlightenment experience. What do you say about some of those people maybe were too afraid to share it with the world because of all the conflict that Sid
Controversy, yeah.
lived through. Yeah. I mean, that may not be anything important for us to even talk about, but that question just came to me. Yeah.
Well, I know, back to what Sid wrote here, and right now, I doubt that the field has even a clue of their existence. So, um, uh, I think when you, like Sid told a story once of someone asked him, what did he think of Jesus Christ? And Sid's reply was, well, if you want to know my opinion, I think he was one of the highest beings to ever walk the face of the earth. And Sid said, right there and then, this man wanted an argument because he figured Buddha was better. And then Sid says, in response to that, and this is on tape that I have, Sid says, there's no one on earth that could understand what both of them are talking about. Which gave me, a little pause right there. Like, if someone of Sid's authority says that, then we all ought to be just better students and listeners to the words of the wise, because there have been many, many, many wise people that have said remarkable things and remarkable true things, but for those of us peons who might arbitrarily decide who's better than who's higher, who's this or who's that, Sid said in that one retort to this man, he said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that somebody's higher or somebody's less high or whatever. And I have to take some interest in Sid couching them as higher, not as he put them, in my mind, he put them in the right context. And so I think those kind of conversations are really just, I mean, he kind of answered, for me, he answered it right there and then, like, you don't have to bother with that, with those comparisons. You as soon as you start that, you're showing your ignorance. And don't.
I love a quote of his. I think it's in The Missing Link when he said, nobody is any more spiritual than anyone else. From whence we came, right? That we all share in that same spiritual essence. And some people who have walked the face of the earth, they have less veils, less thinking, less personal thinking. Maybe that's the distinction between us peons and those who have more understanding.
Well, I'm aware that the time is ticking away and you have something you need to do, right, Dr. Blevins?
I do. Yes, I
You
have
probably have to prepare for something.
well, no preparation, I don't believe, but I have a
And we
couple.
could just keep you all night, Keith. I do have one question that I need clarification on. I had once introduced you or spoke about you as having been the clinical director at Baylor University in Texas. Did I get that wrong?
Well, I was the direct, no, I was the director of the psychological services at Baylor University.
So I was right. Well, that's being clinical director.
Yeah, yeah, but not at the, it was for I was the director of psychological services. So psychological services was an on-campus clinic that I was the director of. And we had doctoral students and we had staff and et cetera who were there to help the students on campus. And
Manage their psychological lives.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, as best we could. Yes,
Mhm.
that was one of my positions I held.
Mhm. I was a nurse for a few years at Harvard University's health services. And one of my early days and, getting used to college health and whatever, and it was an inpatient unit. It was like 8 beds of inpatient. And the first few times we got a admission of a 17 or 18-year-old person with adjustment reaction. It was kind of the context of big fish, small pond of Portland, Oregon, and they were the valedictorian and the hoo-ha, and then they come to Harvard and they're student number 92 out of 120, and they're like, it was the adjustment reaction like that happened quite often, where kids were just like really lost at sea. And another funny thing before we go is a nurse, Harvard University's health services, and they said we have an admission coming up, and it was like, oh, okay, who's coming up? Eric Erickson. And I was like, oh, you're funny. They're like, no, it's Eric Erickson. I'm like, come on. And then another time, it was B.F. Skinner. And I really thought they were kidding because I thought B.F. Skinner had died 100 years prior, because I really wasn't. No, it was B.F. Skinner. And I was like, who's coming in next? Anna Freud? I mean, it was quite the place to be. It was the janitor that had worked at Harvard for 42 years and smoked so much that he lost all of his toes, to the student from Oregon who was the valedictorian who wasn't able to adjust the fact that they was student number 92, to B.F. Skinner. I mean, it was quite the interesting place to work.
That's one of the nice things about medicine, isn't it? Because it's a great equalizer of
It sure is. It sure
whoever,
is.
whoever
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And I've always respected deeply the medical professions. First do no harm, and everyone deserves, even a prisoner or of war from the other side or whatever. They
Mhm.
all deserve the best I can give
Mhm.
for medical care.
Mhm.
So there's a beautiful neutrality in that, and
Mhm.
these principles have that sort of neutrality. They're not under any human um, control.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for this. It's been a pleasant conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
talk about how to, yes,
Uh,
you were going to say something, Wendy. I'm
I was
sorry.
just going to say we'll package it up in a way that makes sense and send it to you for your review, and hopefully
Okay.
be something that we can all be happy is out there in the world, and the ripples.
Yeah.
Quick question before I let you go.
Yeah.
When is the book going to be published?
I don't know. I don't know. That's I don't know. I don't have any idea yet. So
Not yet. You'll let us know.
yeah.
He'll call you and me first, Lori. Of all the people in the world that are interested in that book, Wendy and Lori are the top of the list.
Yeah.
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 Thank you so much, Keith.
Yeah,
for
thank you so much.
taking time out of a busy day, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
yeah.
You're welcome. You're
Thanks
welcome.
again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye now. Bye-bye.